Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
You are. You're back to the world of the living.
We're geared up for a good show. That's Ben Matlock, by the way. I'll introduce you. Geared up for a good show. We've had like 2 weeks off, and we were like, okay, so we can record again. On my end, though, I've got random horrible storms with branches in our trees either coming down or doing something. They smack the side of our house. Got a baby now that'll be crying in the background, a bird that keeps chirping, a dog that was chomping on her food, and a cat that won't stop meowing. So we're set for the most professional.
It sounds like the setup
ever.
for another bad aristocrats joke or something. You got a baby, a bird, and a storm. Yeah, we were originally going to take 1 week off, and then your daughter made it all about her and took an extra week.
Well, I mean, technically, we took that Thursday off, and she was born that Friday. But holy crap! We were not settled in by the next Thursday. Yeah,
you guys were planning for that Sunday, and you were even saying on the last episode, we probably don't have to miss a week. It's and then that very week, I think you spent that entire day or those days, just sort of waiting, okay, come on.
Yeah, we were in the hospital for 5 days, so
yeah,
that was fun. But I got to watch some movies that. And then at first Tara was like, "Oh, you're watching movies without me?" I'm like, "Don't worry, these are all ones you would hate." It was perfect. I got to watch all the things that not all the things, but stuff that I've wanted to watch that I know that she would absolutely not like.
And during labor, you're like, "Keep it down." I'm watching Pulp Fiction.
I'm trying to figure out what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in France.
I'm trying to figure out what they're gonna do. They shot Marvin. But yeah, I'm glad everyone's okay. It actually, being a friend through over the internet and shit is really hard to make sure everything's going okay with people, because you just I knew it was taking a long time, which is kind of scary, and then you just vanished, which makes sense. But when you don't know what's going on, it's oh shit.
That's funny because I've thought about that before too, because. Us, and then just the various people but only know online. And it's if I died in a car crash tomorrow, it would take everybody forever to figure out what happened. I think you'd just eventually be well,
yeah,
something must have happened. He's gone.
It's that kind of world we live in where it's really sad, but I'm sure more than once, somebody's last breath was just tell Twitter. And
well, and that's what's funny. There's a funeral home around here that's advertising how they've got modern services now, and they do online streaming funerals and this and that. And I was laughing at it. I'm that probably wouldn't be a bad thing to have in your will. Be last wish, tweet out a joke about me being dead.
Put my Twitter handle on my tombstone so people know. But we're back. While we were gone, we kind of talked about it. It won't be this week. This week we have more fucking bad, scary stories for you. But we're going to kind of go back to the older format of we'll still do these scary stories, but we'll kind of do the variety thing of whatever we want. And then we're going to keep it to one story a week. So that way it's still a little bit of a lighter load, but that way we're not obligated to fucking write a goddamn short story at a rate that's just impossible now.
Yeah, and that's what I've kind of figured when we went to that. It's I love writing fiction for the show. That was way more fun than I expected it, but it is a lot.
Yeah, and we'll still probably pull it out from time to time, but it won't be the requirement.
And I've got some other ideas for topics too that are kind of in between. Just some fun thing, It'll just be a half-hour variety show, like you said.
Yeah, just to get back to basically what we did after episode 100. Shorten the show, but we're going to keep it looser than sticking to any one format. But like I said, we can kind of start going down that road on the next episode. This week, I have one more creepypasta for you that it really dives into the slasher kind of genre, and you can probably imagine how well that goes because like most slasher villains, and like you think Freddy Krueger and shit, and like even if you like the like first movie or whatever, like those franchises went down the shitter.
It's hard to write. In fact, we watched a series over the summer. I think it was over the summer or spring or whatever, and I think it was on Sci-Fi, but it was all about like horror. I forget what it was called, but like every week they would like, it was almost like a documentary or delve into the different genres. It was all horror, but like one week would be zombies, and one was like werewolves, and one was slasher, and this and that. And I remember when they were talking about slasher and how they talked about, everybody thinks it's just blood and gore and you do this, but like your villains still should represent some kind of fear, like be a metaphor for some kind of fear, and like your characters should still represent things. So if you don't do that or you don't do it well, it can go real bad.
Well, I mean, like,
and that's what tends to happen with sequels, because you've used up your original idea, and then you're just to like, okay, how about Freddy joins the soccer team?
Yeah. Freddy joins the soccer. If they hadn't rebooted it, that probably would have been coming. Freddy versus Air Bud. But the thing with like somebody like Freddy Krueger is like, like you said, it's really hard to write, but where a lot of writers shoot themselves in the foot is they start writing dialogue for these killers. And I was trying to find a story yesterday for the show, and I kind of started on this one, and then the characters started talking, and I was just, okay, we gotta, this fits right in the wheelhouse of like, all right, this shoots all the horror in the foot.
And that's interesting, because I am not like a big horror guy. It's not like, I just don't tend to enjoy it that much. So I'm not like the biggest like horror buff or slasher like historian, but just off the cuff, I can't think of any of those movies where the victims really speak. They might have like a throwaway line. I know Freddy does, I guess, but not.
See, well, that's what changed with Freddy Krueger. Like the reason like Jason Voorhees and like Michael Myers are kind of like, even if their movies go to shit, like they as villains, they are solid enough is because they're just a like presence. They're just a fucking lethal force of nature towards whoever your protagonists are. With Freddy Krueger, it was kind of that way. Like he said some shit, but as the movies went on, it got into really shitty one-liners and stuff.
Yeah, and in fairness to them, it seemed to be a purposeful, like, let's just make this corny as fuck.
Right, right.
But it worked. I guess the only one I can really think of, and I don't know because I never watched the movies, but Jigsaw from Saw. I think he speaks throughout most of those movies.
He's a bit of a different one because he's just really like preachy and annoying.
Yeah, and he's not really the one that's like walking around. He's not that archetypical unstoppable killing machine. He's like more the overlord, like
judgmental,
murderous, like mastermind. Like he's very behind it, but he's not. Right.
Well, well, he sucks because he's just always like, "You've been shooting up heroin for years. How would you like it with all these needles coming down on your head? Ha ha." And like, well, I won't like that at all because there's no heroin in them, and it'll kill me. But anyway, today's story, it did not. I couldn't find the writer name on it, so whoever you are, thank
Probably
you.
Herman Melville.
Yeah,
that's my guess.
Mr. Melville. This is Johnny Revitt. Have you ever wondered what it's like to be in a coma? Some say it's like being stuck between a spirit world and the real world. You can only sit there staring down at yourself, hoping that you will wake up. Yet sometimes one will try to stray away from the cycle. It's a vicious and troublesome task, but for one to break the strings holding them in this observing stage. But if one cared enough, or maybe had some unfinished business within the real world, it becomes slightly possible. The problem with this is, even when you break free, there are still certain drawbacks because you are still slightly in the spirit world. For instance, one cannot be seen by anyone who shares the same family blood, a person in this stage cannot age, and their appearance is altered just a little, perhaps in a more gruesome manner, but somehow they make it by.
Well, hold on. I didn't realize you were reading a textbook.
Yeah, I love when a story starts with like, here are the rules I made up to comas.
From the American Medical Association of...
From some guy who watched The Crow. Here are the rules. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, why am I telling you this? Well, my friend, because this is where Johnny Revitt is right now. He slipped into a coma April 17th, 1952, at the age of only 22 years old. And this...
He just, like, slipped into a coma? It was just, like, one of those, like, whoops, coma?
Well, there's the funny thing, is, like, he didn't just slip into a coma. But we'll get to that.
Okay.
And this is where...
And one more question, real quick.
Sure.
Is this Johnny Reddit, like the forum thing, or Revit, like you're revving an engine?
It's Revitt, so it's Revitt.
Okay, so yeah.
But he's probably on Reddit. And this is where our story begins. A figure sits at the edge of a wooden dock, staring at his reflection in the water. You're a monster now, he thought. You should have just waited out the storm. Johnny stared at his reflection. His face had not really changed much, except for the fact that his mouth was now lined with teeth as sharp as daggers. His deep blue eyes had sunken, showing dark rings around them, and his brown hair was ragged and matted.
So it changed a lot.
Yeah, so, well, he's just... I guess I was disgusting before, but this is a new type of disgusting.
But his nose profile was exactly the same.
I always love when people are like, and his teeth were sharp as knives, so you mean fangs, right? Like, there's a word for that. You let her win. No, she can't. She won't win. I always win. You see, Johnny had...
Monopoly, it's a hell of a game.
Yeah, that's how he slipped into a coma after a rough game of life. You see, Johnny had been a hitman, a person hired and paid money to kill people, which is what a hitman is. You know, I love over explanations. Like,
I like though, like you got to explain the word hitman, and then you got to be like, well, he was also an atheist, and just go on like assume everybody knows what that is. Like,
you see, Johnny had been a hitman, and by that I mean a ball player. Of course he has killed people. Of course, he was fairly young to be in this profession, but Johnny was very good at what he did. He was very sly as well as charming and had an appealing accent. Everything a hitman needs, right? Another account...
Oh, yes, you are going to die now. Well, at least your accent is nice.
Another account to Johnny's success is his ability to build things. He was very handy and could create a weapon out of the spare parts of a clock.
Or by, like, bolting 20 guns together, like the guy you talked about ages ago.
Oh, yeah.
That tried to kill the king.
Yeah. That's how he slipped into the coma. He just blew himself to shit.
Whoops.
All this ties together to the perfect hitman, which was the reason he was hired and became fairly wealthy off of what he did. One day, a few weeks before, Johnny had been hired to kill a wealthy man from London. He had done what he had been told. That night, he took a train to London. He slipped into the man's manor, grabbed him, covered his mouth, and slit his neck. Little did he know that the man's 15-year-old daughter, Mary Ann, had been watching the whole thing. After the incident,
that bitch,
the perfect hitman couldn't make sure that he wasn't seen. Like, that's... But he had a great accent, and he could fucking build a gun out of a rubber band, but he couldn't pay attention to what he was doing.
Yeah. Well, those 15-year-old girls are sneaky.
Yeah. After the incident, Johnny made his way to a local tavern, with Mary Ann following in the shadows close behind. So what the fuck is Mary Ann doing? Like, it's like tiptoe.
I just slit my father's throat in front of me. Let me follow you sneakily.
A few drinks later, always good to get fucking hammered after a job because you're the perfect career hitman. Johnny wasn't too aware of what was going on. A young girl approached him. She had long black hair that curled past her shoulders and beautiful bright green eyes that shined in the light. She outstretched her hand and asked Johnny if he'd like to travel to a motel with her. But it was all a clever trick thought up by the girl.
She's 15. Ask for some ID.
He can't tell that. After 3 drinks, you know, 3 Miller Lights, how can you tell? But it was all a clever trick thought up by the girl. As they shared a bottle of wine in the motel room, Mary Ann had slipped a bit of cyanide into Johnny's drink, which was supposed to kill him. All right, so she's a 15-year-old girl. She just happens.
Cyanide, yeah.
She's just ready to, like, I've been waiting for someone to kill my father for years, and to, instead of, like, sneaking into the bar and just dropping some in his drink there, she had to do this, like, performance.
Well, that way, if he gets away with it, they'll arrest him for pedophilia, too.
Yeah.
Ha-ha.
But it didn't. It caused him to slip into a coma. Everyone else thought that classic cyanide coma. Everyone else thought he was dead. How silly. A dead person can't still exist in the real world. Ending his remembrance, Johnny threw a handful of rocks into the water. I'm not letting her win, he whispered to himself. He sulked away from the dock, leaving the dark, murky waters behind. Marianne walked down an alleyway alone, her dark hair blowing in the breeze of an oncoming storm. It had been 2 weeks since she had killed the horrible man who killed her father. She was currently living with her mother in the small town of Piper, only 4 miles away from London. Things had been fine since she left. Marianne worked for her mother at a small tavern of which her mother owned. Life was much different for Marianne here in Piper. Her mother had little money to go around, unlike her wealthy father. In addition, Marianne could never really shake the feeling that someone was still out there looking for her and waiting until the right moment to strike.
I'm a little curious. If her father was wealthy and got assassinated, you would think at least some of that money would go to her. Like, it's just like, crap.
Well, oddly enough, it all went to Johnny. The single thought sent chills down Marianne's spine as she entered the tavern to work the night shift. The night shift was as it usually had been: wait on a few tables, bring people drinks, and watch as a few people who had a little bit too much to drink fail at the simplest of tasks. The shift was over now, and Marianne was searching through her purse to find the keys to lock up the tavern. She rustled around until she felt the keys in her hand, but when she pulled out the key, it was not just the key, but a small note was tied to it as well. She pulled off the small note and opened it in her hands. It read, "Hello, sweetheart. I left you a surprise in the old clock tower right in the middle of 4th Street. Your father and I used to go there all the time when we were still together. I will meet up with you there. Love, Anna." Strange, Marianne thought. My mom never really had given me anything, so it must be for working so hard, I suppose. We already established
leave it in a clock tower.
Marianne is paranoid. She gets this note from her mother that doesn't say mother, it says Anna. Like, but she's like, geez.
Should I go home and get my cyanide? Nah.
Hey, meet me at a weird fucking tower in the middle of town and not, back at home.
Well, it sounds like she works at the tavern that her mother owns.
Yeah.
So that's even more like
just to pop on
awkward.
In.
Like, your mom's standing right there, but you get this note from your mom instead of her just saying, hey.
Like, sure, I wouldn't, assume, oh, Johnny's back from the dead to kill me reading that, but I would be oh, my mom's definitely going to kill me if I go to that clock tower. Marianne glanced around the tavern, making sure nobody was watching her, but I'd better come prepared just in case.
Aha.
Marianne grabbed a small dagger from underneath the bar where the liquor was stored. She had cyanide at one point.
Well, there's cyanide on the blade of the dagger.
Yeah, she coated it. She placed it in...
Or maybe she got pissed. She's like, I paid full price for the cyanide, and all it did was put him in a coma.
I'm going to get something that works. Big old knife.
A coma knife.
A coma knife. Yeah, that would be funny if that was just her tragedy. She just always needs to, murder people to protect her loved ones, but they always just end up in comas. She placed it in the pocket of her brown leather jacket and walked out the door. She started making her way towards 4th Street. Rain began to fall, causing Marianne to shiver as she walked up the stairs of the old clock tower. She opened the door and walked inside. A figure shuffled in the corner, and Marianne glanced towards it. "Mother?" she stuttered. The eerie ambience was getting to her. She walked towards the figure. The closer she got, the more nervous she became. The figure, it was her mother. Her mother sat there, tears streaming down her face. She was gagged, her hands and feet were tied together, and there were fresh cuts all over her arms and legs. She screamed for help in a muffled voice. "Anna!" Marianne screamed in pure terror at the sight of her mother's dread. There are children, relationships that, they don't say mom and dad. But I feel like you should establish that before you're, Because, like,
Yeah.
this makes it almost seem like it were two different characters at one point.
Especially when, like she says, it was my mother, and then she yells, Anna.
Yeah.
Like,
She kneeled down by her mother and grabbed the dagger out of her pocket and began to saw through the ropes binding Anna's hands and feet. Anna looked above Marianne and began screaming again, the look in her eyes of pure distress. A leather-gloved hand grabbed Marianne from behind and pulled her into a chokehold. She let out a petrified scream and began to struggle, but the more she struggled, the tighter the arm around her neck became. She sputtered, coughed, and kicked as she felt a needle pierce into her skin and inject something into her. The world around her began to blur, her body becoming limp and numb, and everything faded to darkness.
those pushers, the first dose is always free.
It's so free, and then afterwards you're like, my God, thank you. That was the best feeling ever. When Marianne first woke up, everything was a blur. She glanced left to right, trying to figure out what was going on, and she tried to move, but she couldn't. As her vision regained, she realized that her hands and feet were bound to some sort of gears and machinery. She gasped when she regained her memory. She began to struggle once again, trying to slip her hands out of the binding. "Oh, look who's finally awake," a familiar voice interrupted. Marianne turned forward to see the monster standing in the shadows in front of her. He stepped out of the darkness, and that's when Marianne realized. "It's you," she murmured. "That's impossible. You're dead." The man just stood there and smiled. Something was very different about him. He wore those gold and blue goggles over his eyes. That's a weird color scheme. He's like a fucking Naruto character.
He wanted to hide the circles. It's like, I don't want her to think that I'm not sleeping well at night.
His face had been distorted. His grin was from ear to ear, and his teeth were similar to that of a shark. And it seemed that he had painted his face just like a marionette puppet. He wore the same navy blue and gold jacket that he had worn the day he killed her father. He walked a little closer to Marianne and laughed as she thrashed about. "Impossible," she repeated once again. "Sweetheart, it's all but impossible," he smirked, running his fingers through her hair.
Good line.
So, yeah, so this is what I was talking about. Like, the moment you, like, start writing dialogue for your fucking crazy serial killer monster, like, you're walking a tightrope. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying they don't do it here. "My name is Johnny, by the way, and you didn't kill me. You just helped me become stronger. Isn't that great, Marianne?" How do you know my name?" she moaned. What the fuck? Why is she...
I mean, he knew your mom's name. It's not much of a leap to...
He knew your mom's name. He knew your dad. He knew you fucking killed him. You recognized that it was him.
Did you Google me?
"Oh, please, sweetie. I know all the names of everyone I've killed. It's all a part of my job." Marianne had heard enough. She looked down at the ground and accepted defeat. "Now don't look so down on yourself. You did great. You almost had me at the motel, but I played you like a puppet just like you played me. I broke the strings that controlled the system. I'm no puppet, mate." I don't know what that means. Like, that last fucking
there
sentence.
Ain't no strings on me.
Right. It's like he saw the Avengers 2
Pinocchio.
trailer and was like, that is a creepy song. Like, he paced back and forth, keeping his eyes steady on Marianne. "You see this piece of workmanship here?" Johnny held up a small item that was hanging around his neck. It was an impressive little pocket watch, a small clock that he was wearing as a necklace. I don't know if that's just me, but somebody describing a pocket watch as a small clock.
It's a small clock, yeah.
It's like a small time device.
Again, that goes back to the hitman, a person that kills people for money.
Yeah.
A pocket watch is a small clock.
Small clock you can wear around like a necklace or in your pocket.
Pocket.
"Your mother was planning on giving this to you, but I think I will keep it to remember you by." He grinned once again in Marianne's direction. "Shut up," Marianne screamed. "You talk too much." And on that, me and Marianne agree.
Yeah. I thought she had accepted defeat at this point, though. So
But there's something about an
her mind.
asshole that keeps rambling on that you're just like, just fucking knife me already, please. Johnny just continued to talk, ignoring her snide remark. "But I'm just going to leave you with nothing for all your efforts. Johnny stopped talking and approached the frightened girl, removing his goggles and locking eyes with her. He placed his hands on each side of her head and kissed her. He released her and laughed. "You're welcome." He walked over to a lever, and before pulling it, he turned around and looked at Marianne for one last time. "Farewell now, Marianne. It was great seeing you again, but when the clock strikes 12, you will be far from here." Johnny pulled the lever and turned to Marianne and smiled. As the clock struck 1, the gears began to turn. As the clock struck 2, her limbs began to burn. As the clock struck 3, she begins to scream. As the clock struck 4, her bones begin to break.
I like that she waited till 3 to start screaming. She's like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck, it just got worse.
Well, you'll run out of breath. You gotta save it for...
Save it, yeah.
You gotta save it for 3 o'clock. As the clock struck 4, her bones began to break. As the clock struck 5, she kissed her life goodbye. As the clock... I'm glad he made a little nursery rhyme for this. As the clock struck 6, her limbs had been misplaced. As the clock struck 7, blood began to pour. As the clock struck 8, it was far too late. As the clock struck 9, mad laughter filled the room. As the clock struck 10, her world began to fade. As the clock struck 11, there was only silence. As the clock struck 12, she was far gone.
I thought it was far too late, like 4 hours before that. Like,
It was far too late, but she wasn't far gone.
maybe he meant like I was gonna go to Applebee's, but fuck, they're closed now. It's far too late for that.
He said when the clock strikes 12, you'll be far from here. But at 8, it was like, well, even if we stopped it now, you know, you're fucked. Sorry, Marianne.
I think by the time your limbs get misplaced, you're kind of...
You can still live a full life when you're a part of a
Back
clock.
here, I'll bite you. Yeah, I guess I've seen Monty Python. Yeah.
So now begins what they call in the story the epilogue. But this is not what an epilogue is. This is just another part of the story. A single figure stood in a graveyard above a headstone that read, Marianne Anna McDonnell. The figure was Johnny Revitt, the one who had killed the young girl in the first place. He laughed once again as he placed a single red rose on the girl's grave. A sudden pain caused Johnny to stumble to the ground, the side of his face smacking into the cold, hard rubble. He lay there, coughing up a pool of sticky, dark blood around his head. What just happened? He thought. It felt like his chest had exploded, like his heart had just been ripped out. He slowly brought his hand to his chest. The heartbeat, he moaned. There is no heartbeat. A bright, harmonious laughter erupted from above him. He managed to make it to his knees and look up. And it was Marianne, sitting on a single cloud in the sky. There is nothing funnier than, like, he's going to get revenge from heaven itself.
I was hoping that she was still tied to the gear and, like, ah ha ha, it was just a coma, motherfucker.
She just has fucking clock gears attached to her and stuff. Everyone lives forever in this shit. She had all of her limbs again. She was wearing a wonderful white Victorian gown, and her skin was tinted with a soft yet bright glow. It's beautiful, Johnny thought. No, she's beautiful. Marianne smiled at Johnny, a smile of content and joy. You're not too bright, are you? She laughed. Johnny managed to make out a grin. He flashed his toothy smile. Now his pearly white teeth were caked in a red layer of blood. You're dead, Johnny, she whispered. Your mortal body just died. You're now a heartless soul, and soon you will go back to where you really belong. And where may that be? Johnny smirked.
Taco Bell.
Where all good people go when they die. Marianne pointed her silver-lined finger to the ground next to him. Hell, she smiled, and that will be where you will be staying until another person opens the casket of which your body will be stored and releases your current being back into the world. But we all know that will never happen. So, Johnny, I would suggest writing your will now because you are never coming back.
How can he write? She's like, you're dead, so you better go write your will.
Yeah. Better call your lawyer because you're done.
You're going straight to hell until somebody opens up a casket with your body in it, and that won't happen because that makes no... I don't know what I'm talking... I'm just trying to say
not
stuff
to plant seeds, you know, but the only way you're coming back is if somebody lets you come back, and that won't happen.
if a bunch of teens get drunk on Halloween and then they recite this phrase 3 times.
So, Marianne opened her hands, revealing a single piece of brittle paper and a feather. She gave him the ability to write a will.
Oh, yeah.
She released them, letting them float slowly down to them. Johnny caught them and looked back into the sky, but Marianne was gone. Johnny dipped the feather into his pool of blood and began to write. But
I leave this pocket watch to my brother, but smash it with a hammer first because he was a dick.
I leave this pocket watch to my brother. It's like a small clock that you can keep around, and then he dies before he can finish.
I got it by being a hitman, a person who kills people for money.
Johnny dipped the feather into his pool of blood and began to write, but he didn't write his final wishes. What he wrote was far from it. When he was done, only a few minutes later, he triumphantly stood up and placed the note in a nearby casket. So I'm really confused about, he was standing over a grave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is he putting it in they don't have, caskets sitting out?
She got... Maybe, she got buried at, the lazy man's grave. They're like, we'll bury these people when we get to it. They're not going anywhere. They're backed up.
For $5, we'll let you take a look. We'll open up.
Look, the Undertaker's on vacation, folks. We'll get to it. Just leave your bodies here. Don't worry.
When he was done, only a few minutes later, he triumphantly stood up and placed the note in a nearby casket. Suddenly, the ground opened up from under him. Johnny grabbed to the edge of the pit for dear life, but it wouldn't have helped him. Skeletal hands arose from the pit and began to pull him under. It was already too late. It is now January 11th, 2010. Archaeologists were recovering the remains of a small town destroyed years ago from a disaster of a storm. A British man who was searching through the rubble of an old graveyard had come across a casket from long ago. So even stupider than teens. It's like some British guy just wandering through a graveyard. He decided to open it, but what he found inside was not a simple corpse, but a small letter. And it read, "Dear reader, I'm writing this to inform you that you have just released my spirit from the dark pits of hell. Thank you for that. It is much appreciated, for I have most likely been rotting down there for years upon years. Although I'm obliged to warn you that I'm not the kind of human or creature that you should mess with. In fact, you have just released one of the most profound hitmen of my days, and I'm back for revenge. Not on the one who caused my fall, she is far gone, but to anyone I can possibly get my hands on. So thank you again, you have helped me so. Love, Johnny Revitt."
I'm one of the most profound hitmans.
One of the coolest kids in school.
Adjective. B, you got outsmarted by a 15-year-old girl twice.
Right. You were a shithead, man.
And I like that he wrote this letter and stood up triumphantly and smiled. It's wouldn't it have been smarter to not put the letter in the casket and just leave it on the ground and say, "Hey, please open this casket"? Because then it would have been found immediately.
Hey, I'm alive down here.
It's haha, I'm so smart. I left a letter to tell you after the fact that you've opened the casket.
Well, it's gotta be. You gotta find something. You gotta unleash the monster, and the monster always has to be thanks, I'm gonna kill everyone now.
I'm just saying, he could have come back 8 hours later if he would have just left it on the ground hey, if you find this, please open the casket to the left. I'm stuck inside. Because people would assume that's a real person.
Yeah. So yeah, that's Johnny Revitt. Like I said, don't let him fucking talk. It gets so fucking entertaining, but it gets so fucking cheesy and bad.
Yeah. Well, especially when I love that throughout that whole second half of the story, it was the two characters trying to outsmart each other, but nothing was particularly clever.
Well, they fell into every trap. Each one of them, there was never hey, this seems suspicious, I'm not gonna do that. It's well, I'll bring a knife. Hopefully that'll be enough.
And then you find your mom tied up, and you're I'm going to turn my back to the whole room and start with her hands and feet instead of ungagging her so she can warn me that somebody's in the room. I mean, I'm sorry, if I went into a room and found one of my family members tied up, I would assume whoever did it was trying to draw me there.
You would just bail. Oh, fuck this.
Well, I mean, at least like look behind you, right? Like,
I feel like there are ways to like cut your mom free and pay attention to who's around you.
My favorite part of this whole thing, though, is, and I thought of this about halfway through, but it dawned on me that this is like the anti-John Wick. Like, John Wick's a good hitman that goes on a killing spree for like I guess a noble reason, at least in the first one. It's like, oh, you fucked with me and killed my dog, I'm going to get revenge.
Yeah.
This guy's like, I'm killing people for no reason other than money, and you caught me, so now I'm getting my revenge. It's like, well, that's not noble. Like,
yeah.
And he's bad at it.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, and I don't know why they had to make him 22. Like, to be like, oh, but he was such a fucking prodigy hitman. It, like, nothing about the story
like
set
the
him
idea.
up. Like, if you're gonna do the like young, badass, ahead of the curve hitman thing, then you have to like reinforce that.
Yeah.
That like he can't get tricked
you
by
can
a
still have
16-year-old when he's drunk.
I mean, what you do is you use that. I mean, the thing that's true to life, where it's like no matter how good you are, just like the dumbest like thing could happen that you weren't prepared for, and you find out that it's just impossible to be perfect. But not like, I'm so good. Oh, a 15-year-old girl saw me. I didn't notice. She followed
Like,
me,
not
watched
only-
me get drunk,
like, not only-
lured me to a hotel room,
Yeah.
poisoned me.
Yeah, not only did you get poisoned in the hotel room, you couldn't pick up on a fucking kid tailing you to a bar. Like,
My work here is done. I will never look over my shoulder again.
right.
But, yeah.
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 But yeah, entertaining for sure.
I really liked the line in there that was like, oh, that's why they hired him, because he was so good, because that gave me the mental image that there's some like LinkedIn for hitman.
Probably LinkedIn, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like there's probably a Craigslist list for Hitman. Yeah, Craigslist.
That's right. Yeah. Johnny Revitt.
Just always phrase it as I have vermin that need eliminating.
And it's just from a writing perspective, they did the thing that I always do too. You're trying to paint the scene that you have in your head. So he was listing a bunch of details.
Just going
like
too far with it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're listing the details that don't matter to anything, but then everything else you're speaking in generality. Like when she was trailing him to the bar, and he's like, or no, she was going to the tower, and it's like, oh, and she cinched her brown leather jacket. But you never reference that. That doesn't have any bearing on the...
Right. Yeah, like nothing, none of the areas they're actually in, all the pieces of them, but they don't form a coherent, like, image in your head, really.
Yeah, you're just naming stuff to name stuff. And and again, I'm not pointing this out like, oh, they're so stupid, because I'm pointing it out because it's something that I am bad at and I do.
It's a really, that's, because we talk about it all the time, like, where, this isn't bashing particular writers. This is kind of making fun of the whole writing process, because these are all traps we fall into, and that's the worst one, I think, as far as like, because that's something you usually catch, like you realize you did upon editing, and it's the hardest thing to go back and fix, because you have to like rewrite entire chunks to like get it phrased right and actually explain things correctly.
Yeah. And a lot of times, a good edit, you end up with half the amount of words that you had to begin with. But as a writer, then you feel like that's a horrible feeling. You feel like, oh, I just cut like all my story. That's awful.
They're going to miss something important.
But that's how you end up with a good story.
You become fucking Stephen King, and like your story that could have been fucking 200 pages turns into 560.
But yeah, and it's something I've talked about. One of my favorite writers of short stories is Ray Bradbury, and it's because, to me anyway, as a reader, every time I read his stories, it painted such a vivid picture. You could like sense what the characters were like seeing and feeling and smelling even and hearing. And so when you feel like that, and you're like, I love that style of writing, and I look up to that, and I'm going to do it, and you think, well, that must mean I got to mention every little thing, like... He answered the door. There was a pile of pins on the table next to him. It's like, no, that's not how it's...
Johnny was still recovering from a bowel movement the night before. Like, some things leave it to the imagination.
Yeah.
Actually, put that in. I want to know those details.
You always need to write about bowel. That's the thing. I think this story, was really lacking is she didn't nearly shit herself.
That's true.
Or piss herself. Yeah. Like
that would have been great though. Like that detail while the skeletal hands are dragging him to hell. It's just like, and then he shit himself one last time, and
no, it's nearly. It's creepypasta has to be nearly.
Nearly shit himself. Just a just a whiff came out. All that was left was an aroma. So
I mean, they missed a lot of opportunities. She could have nearly shit herself when she watched him murder her dad.
Yeah,
and.
Well, I mean, that's the reality of life, is we could all nearly shit ourselves at any given moment. So stay safe out there. Try to keep it in. But yeah, that's this week's story. That's this week's show. We're back. Next week we will make your baby read the story.
Yeah, she'll be there. Sure, I'm trying to teach her. It's frustrating.
Get into show business now, kid.
She's nearly 2 weeks old, and she still doesn't do anything I tell her to do, and it's frustrating.
That that tweet where you were talking about like, oh, I just changed her diaper, and then she shit her new diaper. Was the funniest fucking like. I was like, good kid. I like her.
Oh, they do that a lot. That was like the first time for me, but that's a pretty common.
I bet
common thing. Yeah. It's like what? These things cost $50 a pop? Haha, fucker.
It'll make me feel better at work when, like, I'm shopping for people and they need like diapers or something. I'll know why. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they wanted a 250 pack. Just keep in mind that that's like his 4-day supply. Yeah.
It's so fucking gross.
They're really
the
not
circle of life we agree to.
It's really not as bad. Everybody like makes it out to be like, oh, it's going to be awful. You have to change that and say, I've got a dog shit all over the place too. I've dealt with it. It's not like you pick it up with your bare hands and then like rub it on your face. But
I cleaned up dog poop from the hallway like 2 nights ago. It sucked shit. Right.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's fucking gross. It's disgusting, and I will let my child know that very clearly. Like, I don't appreciate this. You didn't have to do me like that.
Yeah, I'm a good dad when she's like, what, about 11 days old, and I've called her a stupid baby about 40 times. Because they do stupid baby stuff. Like, she'll have her pacifier, and she'll fling it out of her mouth and then scream because she wants her pacifier. And it's like,
but parents always have nicknames for their kids. It'll be adorable when she's 30, and you're still calling her stupid baby.
Dad, I just got laid off from work, and she calls me crying, and it's like, stupid baby.
Click. But, yeah, we're back, and we'll be back next week. And things will keep going. We're back on the rails, and that can only mean one thing: that the train wreck will not be entirely our fault. See you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.